As we've learned, words and ideas are violence, which brings us to the American Bookseller Association, a trade organization that works with booksellers in the country, hence the name. And recently they sent out what they call their white box mailing, which sounds a little racist to me, frankly, to 750 bookstores. One of the titles in that package was Abigail Schreier's excellent book called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. If you want to hear more about that book, you can check out my interview with Schreier on my YouTube channel. But the mere sight of this book was apparently quite traumatizing to some of the people who received it, and that led to backlash, and that led to the American Booksellers Association releasing one of the most pitiful, embarrassing, self-flagellating, groveling apologies we have yet seen. Yesterday afternoon, they put this out on Twitter. This is what they said. Quote, an anti-trans book was included in our July mailing to members. This is a serious, violent incident that goes against ABA's policies, values, and everything we believe and support. It is inexcusable. We apologize to our trans members and to the trans community for this terrible incident and the pain we caused them. We also apologize to the LGBTQIA plus community at large and to our book-selling community. Apologies are not enough. We've begun addressing this today and are committed to engaging in the critical dialogue needed to inform concrete steps to address the harm we caused. Personally, I'm offended because in their statement, they did not include the phrase lived experience, and they also didn't include the phrase do the work. And we know that in these kinds of statements, those two phrases are required. You know, it's an interesting thing, though, about the LGBTQIA plus community. We're told that they're strong and proud and brave and stunning, and yet we're also told that they're so fragile as to be harmed by merely looking at the cover of a book they don't like. So which is it? Is it strong and brave and proud, or fragile, prone to collapsing into puddles of tears at the sight of a book? It's kind of got to be one or the other, right? Now, the next part of the story is so predictable that you can fill in the blanks yourself. I'll ask you, do you think that the ABA was forgiven for this grave offense? Was the apology accepted? Did the groveling and self-abasement achieve whatever end they had in mind? Of course not. Publishers Weekly reports, quote, booksellers said the apology fell short, calling out the organization's use of the passive voice in the opening sentence. They also demanded greater transparency about how the decision to include the book was initially made and called for demonstrable steps to restore trust with trans bookworkers and authors. Some called on the ABA to offer promotions for trans authors, books at no cost. Just straight up extortion. You want our feelings to not be heard anymore? Just give us promotions at no cost. That'll heal our emotional wounds. And also $500,000 in unmarked bills. Okay. Anyway, back to the statement. It says, ABA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee member Louis Correa, who works as a bookseller at Avid Bookshops in Athens, Georgia, was first made aware of the issue when fellow booksellers emailed him Morrissey's tweet. Correa identifies as a queer Latino and fat-bodied person. Oh my gosh. Identifies as a fat-bodied person. Well, you either have a fat body or you don't. But what's the point of saying that? You're either a man or you're not, right? He said he thought the apology was flawed. I'm disappointed with the use of the passive language at the beginning of the statement and the shift in blame. They really should have said that we included this book, Correa said. So the apology was not enough. So what do? Apology is not enough. What do you do now? Well, you keep apologizing. More from Publishers Weekly. They say, in an email late Wednesday, ABA CEO Allison Hill issued an additional statement to booksellers. She apologized not only for the promotion of Schreier's book, but also for a racist incident last week in which the organization featured Blackout by Danielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thompson, Ashley Woodfolk, and Nicola Yoon on its Indie Next bestseller list, but included an incorrect cover image. Instead of using the actual cover, the ABA used a book cover by an author who Hill described as, quote, a different black author, a right-wing extremist. Editor's note here, the right-wing extremist is our very own Candace Owens, who also wrote a book called Blackout. Apparently it's racist to promote Candace Owens, who, you may have noticed, is black. But the apology said, we traumatized and endangered members of the trans community. We erased black authors, conflated black authors, and put the authors in danger through a forced association. We further marginalized communities that we want to support, Hill wrote. She reiterated that the organization will take steps to address both instances in the coming weeks, adding that, quote, there is nothing that I can say that will make this right. This should not have happened. I want to apologize for both of these harms and for the pain that ABA caused. But I know only action matters. These were egregious, harmful acts that caused pain and violence. One negligent, irresponsible, and racist. The other negligent, irresponsible, and transphobic. She then took out a knife and committed hara-kiri on the spot. Perhaps not literally, but figuratively at least. And even if she had done it literally, the left still would not have been satisfied. They would have said that that form of suicide isn't painful enough. She should have done something more progressive, like throw herself into a wood chipper. Their whole gig, the whole point, is to be offended and victimized and traumatized all the time, always, by everything. Anything you do to relieve the trauma will only further it. But that won't stop the gutless, spineless blobfish among us from trying. Now, as for the book itself, you will notice that none of the people complaining about it have bothered to articulate any sort of criticism about the content of the book itself. What is your problem exactly with the book? What's wrong about it? What does it get wrong? Well, they can't say. That's because the book itself is well-researched, balanced, almost entirely non-polemical, and it focuses specifically on the explosion of trans identification among adolescent girls who are so often pushed along the path to full medical transition without anyone stopping to even consider why else a young girl might feel dysphoric about her body. Nor do they worry about any of the long-term effects that they are consigning her to. In other words, the book from a content perspective is unassailable. It is unassailable factually, scientifically, and morally, which is why they assail it in general terms on an emotional level based on the title and the cover. But the most interesting and disturbing thing about this story is the use of the word violent, I think. ABA called the mailing of the book a violent incident, and they kept using, violence, harm, pain, all these kinds of words. I can see how mailing something might be violent if, Ted Kaczynski is the guy sending the package, but how can a book be violent? How can words and ideas be violent? I think the answer refers us back to the opening of the show yesterday when we talked about the left's intense, obsessive, nearly exclusive focus on the self, specifically on how the self feels about itself. According to the leftist religion, nothing matters so much as that. Your self-perception is more important even than your own physical health, which is why people mutilate their physical bodies in order to conform to their self-perception. If there's a lack of correlation, if there's an incongruity between the self-perception, the mind, the emotions, and the physical body, rather than try to conform the self-perception to the physical body, they go the other way around. Literally chopping pieces off of the body in order to make it conform with the self-perception. Everything must be enslaved, subjugated by the self's perception of itself. Everything is in service to that perception. Everything and everyone must affirm that perception. And the problem is that self-perception is a fragile, fickle, ever-changing thing. Emotions change. How you feel about yourself changes. How you see yourself changes. Which means that the world's affirmation must be unyielding and unconditional. This is what's meant by violence. This is how speech and opinions and ideas become violent. They're violent because an opposing idea, an argument, a fact presented might undermine or cause you to question your self-perception, or at the very least, it may fail to enthusiastically affirm that perception, which is to do it harm, which is violence. Everything that matters to a leftist is happening in the realm of emotions and thoughts, in the ego. Actual reality is irrelevant to them. And so when you hurt their feelings or cause them to think uncomfortable thoughts, you have hurt them in the way that matters most to them. You have committed violence. That's where this is coming from, which is not to defend it. I mean, this is all quite insane, deeply disordered, not a way for any human to live. It's a recipe for confusion and despair and a life wasted, trapped in your own ego, looking in the mirror, smelling your own farts. But this is the life that a leftist leads. And it's the life he wishes for you, and especially for your children, to join him in his psychosis. And that is an invitation that I think we should all certainly decline. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.